My brother said I'd never be more than a background officer. The next morning, I walked into his meeting in full uniform as the Pentagon liaison overseeing his $1.2 billion project. And yes, I made him answer my questions. Professionally. Madison Cole tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the Montana plains unfolded before her, stretching endlessly into the late afternoon sun. Her heart beat in uneasy rhythm with the tires spinning beneath her. 5 years. That's how long it had been since she last drove this road, since she'd left behind the house with the blue shutters, the perfectly trimmed lawn, and the family who looked at her like she'd chosen failure wrapped in camouflage. A cool breeze danced through the half-cracked window, but it did little to stop the warmth pooling in her palms. She rubbed her hands against her jeans as if trying to shake off the tension. Somewhere in the backseat, tucked beneath her travel duffel, sat a carefully zipped garment bag. Inside was her dress uniform, its dark blue fabric flawless, its brass buttons polished, its silver eagle insignia gleaming beneath the light. Colonel Madison Cole. At 28, one of the youngest in the Cyber Defense Division. But none of that mattered here. Not in Evergreen, Montana population 3042. Not to her parents, who still introduced her brother Evan as the pride of the family and referred to her job simply as her situation with the Army. Not to a mother who once said over Thanksgiving dinner you could have gone to law school like Evan. But I guess we all need to take our own detours. Detour. That word had lived rent-free in Madison's head for years. They called it a detour. She called it the decision that saved her life. The dashboard clock blinked 6:42 p.m. Just in time for the Friday family dinner tradition. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a salad no one ever touched. And the familiar suffocating sense of sitting at a table where she had long stopped being seen. She had called ahead, told them she'd be coming. Her father Harold said he'd let her mother know. Her mother hadn't returned the call. That said, enough. Madison pulled into the driveway, noticing not much had changed. The flower beds were still meticulously arranged, the porch still lined with rocking chairs that no one actually used. Her father's old Buick was parked out front. A newer Audi stood beside it, Evan's no doubt. Of course, he was already here. She put the car in park, took a breath, and looked into the rearview mirror. Her reflection stared back, eyes sharper than they were at 23, face leaner, wiser, touched by the grit of 1,000 quiet battles fought overseas and behind closed doors in briefing rooms full of men who doubted her. Her dark hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense braid, just as it had been during her last debrief. She glanced toward the back seat, toward the bag. Number. Not yet. Not tonight. This wasn't the battlefield. This was something harder, home. She stepped out of the car, her boots crunching softly against the gravel. The familiar creak of the wooden porch greeted her, followed by the quiet scent of honeysuckle. As she reached the front door, she hesitated. Her hand hovered just above the handle. You're not that girl anymore, she reminded herself. You're not 17 begging for them to say they're proud. You're not 23 driving away with a scholarship letter and tears in your eyes. You're Colonel Madison Cole now. Walk like it. The door opened before she could knock. Madison, her father said with a surprised blink, stepping aside. Didn't hear you pull up. She offered a polite smile. Hey, Dad. Inside the house looked just as she remembered. The same beige carpet. The same framed family photos along the hallway, her high school graduation, Evan's college commencement, a family trip to the Grand Canyon. None of her commissioning ceremony. None of her awards. Nothing from the last 5 years. Everyone's in the dining room, he said, already walking ahead. Your mom made your favorite. Well, she didn't know for sure you'd be joining. Evan got here early. He's got some big news. Of course he does. She followed the sound of chatter into the dining room where her mother, her brother Evan, and his wife Danielle were already seated. The table was set with the usual care linen napkins, Grandma's silverware candles that would never be lit. Oh, Madison, her mother said, standing halfway with a stiff smile. You're here. We weren't sure. Madison nodded. Got in just now. Her mother hugged her briefly, air between shoulders, not much warmth. Well, sit down. There's chicken and sweet corn, just how you used to like it. Used to, Madison noted, silently taking her seat between the silence and the expectations. Evan looked up from his glass of wine. Still wearing combat boots, huh? Still making passive-aggressive comments, huh? She replied with a tilt of her head. He laughed as if it were all just banter. Glad you're here. You picked a good night. Big news from Pinnacle. I just got appointed project lead on a new defense integration system. CEO personally tapped me. Congratulations, Madison said, voice smooth as satin. She said she's never seen someone bring such a fresh perspective, he added, glancing at their parents for affirmation. He got it. That's our Evan, her mom beamed. Always rising. No one asked Madison how her flight was. Or where she'd come from. Or what she'd been working on. She reached for the corn, chewing slowly, the room spinning around her in soft tones of celebration and selective amnesia. Inside her chest, something old stirred, not resentment, not quite, but that familiar ache. The ache of being in the room but not in the conversation, a visitor to your own family. Madison quietly excused herself after dinner and went upstairs to the old room, still painted seafoam green, still filled with dusty trophies and college prep brochures. She sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars still clung stubbornly from childhood. In the corner, her suitcase. And inside it, her uniform. Tomorrow, the game would change. But tonight, she would sit in this in-between space between the person they remembered and the woman they never really saw. She exhaled and whispered to no one. They don't have to see me, they just have to listen tomorrow. The clinking of silverware and occasional bursts of laughter echoed from downstairs. Madison lingered a moment longer in her old bedroom, sitting on the edge of the twin bed like a guest at a museum exhibit of her past life. Her fingers traced the edge of a worn photo frame, her high school graduation tassel, tilted smile strained. Her mother had insisted on hanging it up, said it was the last time Madison looked like she fit. She drew a long breath, squared her shoulders, and descended the stairs. The table was now cleared of food but cluttered with dessert plates and half-filled glasses. Evan, in a crisp button-down and expensive watch, held court at the head of the table. Her father's usual spot, animatedly recounting a recent meeting with executives from Pinnacle Defense Systems. And then Shannon looked right at me and said, I want someone agile and forward-thinking heading this up. She didn't even consider anyone else. Told the board she saw something in me. That's incredible, sweetheart, Catherine said, eyes glowing. She must see what we've always known. Her father nodded, sipping his wine, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. That's our Evan. Quick rise like his old man. Madison returned to her seat, folding her hands neatly in her lap, the good daughter performance rehearsed to muscle memory. She offered a smile at the appropriate moment, gave a soft, that's great, Evan, even as her stomach tightened with something she refused to call grief. The conversation circled her like she wasn't there. Madison, her mother said, suddenly turning toward her for the first time since dinner began. You've been. Well, I imagine things are different in the army. They always said it like that. The army. Like it was some vague, dusty place far away and irrelevant. Like saying a job in retail or somewhere out west. Yes, Madison said evenly. Very different. I imagine it must be hard, all the moving around. Catherine continued, cutting her pie with unnecessary force. It's a lot for a woman to handle long term. You know, not having roots. I suppose I do have roots, Madison replied. Just not the kind that need a mortgage. Evan chuckled. Still not a fan of commitment, huh? She looked at him. His smile was too practiced, too polished. I'm committed to national security if that counts. Sure, he said, waving his fork like a wand. Still a lieutenant or something, haven't kept up with the whole rank thing. Harold added with a casual shrug, hard to keep track. Army titles don't mean much in the business world, right? Madison bit the inside of her cheek. Actually, she's probably higher up by now, Danielle chimed in surprisingly. Didn't you mention in your Christmas card last year that you were working on some kind of cybersecurity project? Madison nodded slightly. I've led a few initiatives. That's nice, her mother interjected before she could elaborate. Though I do think it's important for women to find careers that let them come back home eventually. Something steady. Stable. You know. Normal. Madison wanted to laugh. Steady. Stable. Normal. Words like shackles dressed up in Sunday language. You know what I think, Evan said, setting down his fork with dramatic flair. I think Maddie always liked doing things the hard way. Remember when she insisted on learning stick shift instead of letting me teach her automatic? That's not how I remember it, Madison said calmly. You refused to let me drive unless I called you sir. The table chuckled awkwardly. Madison reached for her glass of water, her hand steady, but inside she felt 13 again. Sitting at this same table being lectured about college rankings. Being told that ROTC was for kids who didn't get into real schools. Hearing Evan say she just doesn't want to compete with me. That's why she's choosing the Army. Some things never changed. Or maybe they just calcified. So what are you up to now? Harold asked, glancing at her for the first time all night. I mean, besides, shuffling between bases. Still in service, Madison answered coolly. Just completed a major cyber operations program. I'm consulting now on a defense integration contract. That sounds busy, her mother said, her voice laced with concern disguised as condescension. You know, Evan just bought a new townhouse downtown. 3 bedrooms, plenty of space for guests. Danielle nodded politely. We'd love to have you visit sometime, Maddie. I appreciate the offer, she said, her throat dry. Catherine tilted her head. But don't you ever think about settling down, Madison? You're 28. You've done your adventures. Don't you want something real? The words landed like a slap. Madison's gaze swept across the table, every chair filled with people who claimed to love her, but never once asked about her deployments, her team, the lives she'd helped protect or the ones she'd mourned. No one knew she'd spent her last Christmas coordinating a cyber response unit in Germany while others were opening gifts. No one knew she'd held her commander's hand as he died from a drone strike. No one had asked. I have something real, she said quietly. The table went silent. I have purpose, responsibility, autonomy, and yes, rank. I lead men and women in high-level operations. I work 12-hour days ensuring that systems stay safe from national threats. That's real, even if it's not hanging on your living room wall. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Evan laughed nervously. Well, guess that's one way to put it. Harold cleared his throat. Let's not make this political. Madison stood. Excuse me, she said. I need some air. She didn't slam the door. That would have given them too much. She stepped out onto the porch, the cool night wrapping around her like a secret. Inside, they continued talking. Probably about Evan's new leather sofa. Or Danielle's client list. Madison looked up at the stars, clear and cold. She was used to being invisible. But tomorrow she would no longer be silent. The night was silent save for the whisper of wind rustling through the pines behind the Cole family home. Madison sat on the back porch now, her arms wrapped loosely around her knees, her breath visible in the cool mountain air. She hadn't meant to retreat this far from the house, but her body knew the routine: when wounded, find higher ground. She leaned her head back against the siding, staring up at the endless Montana sky. The stars here were unpolluted, sharp, unapologetic in their clarity. They reminded her of bivouacs in Kandahar, briefings in Berlin, and the single long night she'd stayed awake in a bunker somewhere in Nevada, watching lines of malicious code crawl across a classified screen code that, if left undetected, could have exposed half the nation's missile systems. And still, she thought, my mother thinks I need a stable condo. Her phone buzzed once, low in her pocket. A calendar alert, Project Horizon strategy brief. Final prep. A meeting she would lead in 48 hours. She smiled faintly. Not because of the importance, it was old news to her by now, but because it reminded her how far she had come without them. She closed her eyes and the memories poured in, uninvited but not unwelcome. She was 21, sitting at the edge of the dining room table, ROTC scholarship letter in hand. Her mother was folding laundry, her father was editing a report for work. I've decided, she had said quietly, almost reverently. I'm accepting the Army scholarship. The air had gone still, like a glass of water tipping mid-fall. Her father didn't look up. Why? Because I want to serve. And it'll pay for my degree. It's a solid future. Solid, he said, finally setting his pen down. Madison, the military is for people who don't have better options. You got into Northwestern's MBA program. Her mother hadn't said anything. She had just folded a towel with unnecessary force. "I don't want an MBA," Madison had whispered. "I want to build something that matters." "You're wasting your potential," her father had replied. She never forgot the sting of those words. Not even years later, when she stood alone on a stage in her cadet uniform receiving her commission as a second lieutenant. Her roommate's parents had brought flowers and balloons. Madison had looked out into the crowd and found one empty chair reserved for Mr. and Mrs. Cole. She had kept the name tag folded in her journal like a pressed flower. They hadn't called. Not that day. Not the next. Even when she deployed to Germany for her first rotation, no one at home asked what she was working on. When she helped develop firewall protocols for NATO's internal networks, her mother sent her a photo of Evan's new kitchen backsplash instead. She was stationed in Poland for a year, sleeping in rotating shifts and tracking ransomware attacks on critical infrastructure. Her birthday that year went unnoticed except for a package of peanut butter cookies from her squad leader's wife. She learned to stop expecting. She learned to bloom in silence. By 25, she was running a unit that specialized in counter-infiltration response. At 26, she cracked a multinational cyber breach that had targeted 4 defense contractors, including one directly connected to domestic missile silo systems. That operation earned her a classified commendation and a promotion to major 6 months ahead of schedule. She remembered standing at attention while General Lauren Grant pinned her insignia to her collar. "You're the quiet kind of dangerous," the general had told her with a rare smile. "And we need more of that." She had wanted in that moment to call home. To tell her father that someone believed in her. That someone important thought she was more than just a girl in uniform. But instead, she wrote an email to her old professor who once told her, "You don't have to be loud to be powerful." 2 years later, General Grant herself recommended Madison to the Department of Defense Liaison Board to lead oversight for Project Horizon, a $1.2 billion cybersecurity collaboration with Pinnacle Defense Systems. Madison had been stunned when she received the assignment. Not because she didn't think she deserved it, but because it was that Pinnacle. Her father's company. Her brother's new domain. The place where she had once been told she wouldn't fit the culture. She accepted the role without hesitation. Not for revenge, but because she knew she was the most qualified. The irony was simply poetic. She opened her eyes again, now pulled from the memory by the creaking of the back door. She didn't turn. "You always did come out here when things got." Loud came a voice. "Evans." She kept her gaze forward. "Some things don't change." He stood behind her for a moment, then walked down to sit on the porch step, a respectful distance between them. "They don't mean to come off so dismissive," he said after a beat. "They just don't know how to talk about what you do." "They don't try to," Madison replied. Evan exhaled, scratching the back of his neck. "I didn't know you were as high up as you are. I thought you were still, I don't know, rotating somewhere in Korea or something." "Funny," she said. All it would have taken was a phone call. Another silence. Not hostile, just thick. "You're in town for the Pinnacle project?" he asked. She turned her head slightly. "You'll find out tomorrow." There was no venom in her voice, only precision. Evan stood, nodding slowly. "Okay." She didn't expect an apology, and he didn't give one. As the door closed behind him, Madison looked back up at the stars. "They never saw me," she thought. But the world did. And in a few short hours, the gap between those two truths would collapse. The night was silent, save for the whisper of wind rustling through the pines behind the Cole family home. Madison sat on the back porch now, her arms wrapped loosely around her knees, her breath visible in the cool mountain air. She hadn't meant to retreat this far from the house, but her body knew the routine when wounded find higher ground. She leaned her head back against the siding, staring up at the endless Montana sky. The stars here were unpolluted, sharp, unapologetic in their clarity. They reminded her of bivouacs in Kandahar, briefings in Berlin, and the single long night she'd stayed awake in a bunker somewhere in Nevada, watching lines of malicious code crawl across a classified screen code that, if left undetected, could have exposed half the nation's missile systems. And still she thought, "My mother thinks I need a stable condo." Her phone buzzed once low in her pocket. A calendar alert, Project Horizon strategy brief, final prep. A meeting she would lead in 48 hours. She smiled faintly. Not because of the importance it was old news to her by now, but because it reminded her how far she had come without them. She closed her eyes and the memories poured in uninvited but not unwelcome. She was 21, sitting at the edge of the dining room table, ROTC scholarship letter in hand. Her mother was folding laundry. Her father was editing a report for work. "I've decided," she had said quietly, almost reverently. "I'm accepting the Army scholarship." The air had gone still, like a glass of water tipping mid-fall. Her father didn't look up. "Why?" "Because I want to serve. And it'll pay for my degree. It's a solid future." "Solid," he said, finally setting his pen down. "Madison, the military is for people who don't have better options. You got into Northwestern's MBA program." Her mother hadn't said anything. She had just folded a towel with unnecessary force. "I don't want an MBA," Madison had whispered. "I want to build something that matters." "You're wasting your potential," her father had replied. She never forgot the sting of those words. Not even years later, when she stood alone on a stage in her cadet uniform, receiving her commission as a second lieutenant. Her roommate's parents had brought flowers and balloons. Madison had looked out into the crowd and found one empty chair reserved for Mr. and Mrs. Cole. She had kept the name tag folded in her journal like a pressed flower. They hadn't called. Not that day. Not the next. Even when she deployed to Germany for her first rotation, no one at home asked what she was working on. When she helped develop firewall protocols for NATO's internal networks, her mother sent her a photo of Evan's new kitchen backsplash instead. She was stationed in Poland for a year, sleeping in rotating shifts and tracking ransomware attacks on critical infrastructure. Her birthday that year went unnoticed except for a package of peanut butter cookies from her squad leader's wife. She learned to stop expecting. She learned to bloom in silence. By 25, she was running a unit that specialized in counter-infiltration response. At 26, she cracked a multinational cyber breach that had targeted 4 defense contractors, including one directly connected to domestic missile silo systems. That operation earned her a classified commendation and a promotion to major 6 months ahead of schedule. She remembered standing at attention while General Lauren Grant pinned her insignia to her collar. "You're the quiet kind of dangerous," the general had told her with a rare smile. "And we need more of that." She had wanted in that moment to call home. To tell her father that someone believed in her, that someone important thought she was more than just a girl in uniform. But instead, she wrote an email to her old professor who once told her, "You don't have to be loud to be powerful." 2 years later, General Grant herself recommended Madison to the Department of Defense Liaison Board to lead oversight for Project Horizon, a $1.2 billion cybersecurity collaboration with Pinnacle Defense Systems. Madison had been stunned when she received the assignment. Not because she didn't think she deserved it, but because it was that Pinnacle. Her father's company. Her brother's new domain. The place where she had once been told she wouldn't fit the culture. She accepted the role without hesitation. Not for revenge, but because she knew she was the most qualified. The irony was simply poetic. She opened her eyes again, now pulled from the memory by the creaking of the back door. She didn't turn. "You always did come out here when things got." Loud came a voice. "Evans." She kept her gaze forward. "Some things don't change." He stood behind her for a moment, then walked down to sit on the porch, step a respectful distance between them. "They don't mean to come off so dismissive," he said after a beat. "They just don't know how to talk about what you do." "They don't try to," Madison replied. Evan exhaled, scratching the back of his neck. "I didn't know you were as high up as you are. I thought you were still, I don't know, rotating somewhere in Korea or something." "Funny," she said. All it would have taken was a phone call. Another silence. Not hostile, just thick. "You're in town for the Pinnacle project?" he asked. She turned her head slightly. "You'll find out tomorrow." There was no venom in her voice, only precision. Evans stood, nodding slowly. "Okay." She didn't expect an apology, and he didn't give one. As the door closed behind him, Madison looked back up at the stars. "They never saw me," she thought. But the world did. And in a few short hours, the gap between those two truths would collapse. The house was still when Madison re-entered. The kind of quiet that only came in small towns after 10 p.m., when televisions hum on low volume and the humdrum of domestic life fades to whispers. Her boots made no sound against the carpeted stairs. No creaks or groans from the floorboards followed her this time. Even the air felt softer somehow. She closed the bedroom door behind her and exhaled. This was not a room that had changed with her. It was still pastel walls and yearbook photos. Still shelves lined with trophies from an era that no longer defined her. But behind the closet door, hidden between outdated winter coats and an old cheer jacket, was the one item that did. She opened the closet slowly and reached for the garment bag tucked behind a box labeled Madison's college stuff. With practiced fingers, she unzipped the bag and revealed the deep navy blue uniform neatly pressed and waiting. Her hand hovered over the silver eagle on the collar, the emblem that had taken years of proving, failing, rising again, and exceeding expectations no one ever thought to hold for her. She didn't smile. Pride didn't need theatrics tonight. It only needed breath. She set the uniform gently on the bed and retrieved her travel steamer from the suitcase. As the iron hissed to life, she rolled each sleeve flat, smoothed every fold. Her motions were methodical, reverent, even an unspoken ritual. The same way some people light candles at altars, she adjusted nameplates and polished insignias. This wasn't for show. It wasn't for her family. It was for herself. Each ribbon represented a mission, a choice, a sacrifice. She cleaned the combat readiness medal with a cotton cloth. She paused over the Joint Service Commendation and the NATO Defense Ribbon. Her chest ached momentarily at the memory behind that: one lost comrades, quiet nights in foreign lands, and a resilience no one ever taught her except time. She clipped her hair back with military precision, examining her reflection in the mirror above the dresser she once used to store prom makeup. What stared back was not the insecure daughter who once begged for her father's praise. It was not the girl they remembered. It was Colonel Madison Cole, military liaison to the Department of Defense, lead strategic officer on Project Horizon, and the final voice on a $1.2 billion federal contract. The soft knock on her door startled her. She opened it a crack to find her mother, Catherine, standing there with a puzzled expression. "You're still up?" her mother asked. "Couldn't sleep." Catherine's eyes drifted over Madison's shoulder and caught sight of the uniform laid out on the bed. Her lips parted slightly, either in recognition or regret. Madison couldn't tell. "That's the one you wear. When it matters," Madison said softly. They stood in silence. The hallway light behind Catherine cast a halo around her graying hair. She looked older than Madison remembered, not just aged, hollowed. Worn by expectation, by fear, perhaps even by her own regrets. "Big meeting tomorrow?" Catherine asked. Madison nodded. "Yes." "At Pinnacle?" Her mother's brows lifted. "Oh, are you presenting something there?" "No," Madison said calmly. "I'm overseeing it." Catherine blinked. "Overseeing the project?" "Project Horizon. It's under my command. I've been the liaison for 6 months. Tomorrow is the formal review." Another silence. This one deeper. Less awkward. More like the kind you stand in when something foundational shifts beneath your feet. "Well," Catherine said, voice thin. "I hope it goes well." Madison offered a faint smile. "It already has." She gently closed the door and returned to the bed, slipping the polished uniform back into the garment bag. The room felt smaller now. Not because she had outgrown it, but because it had never been big enough to contain who she had become. She set her alarm for 0600. Tomorrow wasn't about vindication. It wasn't even about making a point. It was about showing up not as someone needing to be seen, but as someone whose worth no longer depended on it. The air outside Pinnacle Defense Systems was sharp with early morning frost. Madison adjusted the collar of her uniform slightly and stepped out of her government-issued sedan. The military liaison placard on the dashboard gleamed subtly under the rising sun. She paused for a second, taking in the reflective glass facade of the headquarters. The building stood tall, modern, sleek, every inch designed to impress. But to Madison, it was just another place to do her job. Another room to command, another mission to execute. This wasn't about making a statement. It was about stepping fully into the role she'd spent years earning. She walked toward the main entrance with a measured pace. Two security guards at the gate spotted the silver eagle on her shoulder and straightened instinctively. "Good morning, Colonel," one of them said. She nodded. "I'm here for the Project Horizon review." "Colonel Madison Cole." "Yes, ma'am." "You're expected in conference room A. Would you like an escort?" "No need. I know the layout." She didn't need to be shown where to go. She had reviewed blueprints, security protocols, even vendor access logs for this visit. It was her job to know what others overlooked. As the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, time seemed to slow. Down the hallway just outside the glass panel meeting room, her brother Evan stood surrounded by a small circle of managers. He was laughing until he saw her. His smile faltered. His voice stilled. Then, his expression froze completely. It took him a few seconds to recognize the rank. A few more to understand the implications. "Madison," he said, incredulous. "What are you?" Before he could finish, footsteps echoed from the opposite hallway. A woman in a fitted charcoal suit, hair pulled into a no-nonsense chignon, approached at a brisk pace. The name badge read, Shannon DeWitt, Chief Executive Officer. Her eyes lit up when she saw Madison. "Colonel Cole," Shannon exclaimed, extending a hand before Madison could even offer a salute. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person." Madison shook her hand firmly. "Likewise, Miss DeWitt." "No need for formalities today," Shannon beamed. "Your briefing papers were razor sharp. The Pentagon's lucky to have you on this." Madison gave a nod. "I appreciate the confidence. I thought it was time we handled this phase face to face." Shannon gestured warmly. "Come in, please. Your seat's already prepared." Madison followed her into the conference room. All eyes turned. Her father, Harold Cole, was already seated near the front of the table. A senior executive nameplate in front of him read Director of Regional Operations. He looked up as she entered. First confusion, then recognition, and finally something else entirely. "Colonel," Shannon said to the room, motioning with a gracious hand, "please allow me to formally introduce our Department of Defense liaison on Project Horizon, Colonel Madison Cole." The silence was immediate and complete. Her father's face went pale. Evan sat down without a word. Only Shannon's voice moved the air. "Colonel Cole has full strategic authority to review and approve all components of the cybersecurity infrastructure we're developing in this contract. That includes system design, budget allocations, and personnel assignments." Madison moved calmly to her seat placed at the right hand of the CEO. The room had shifted, and everyone knew it. She opened her folder and glanced once at Evan across the table. He looked as though the foundation of his world had been reset, like a man who realized he'd spent his whole life climbing a ladder only to find it leaning against the wrong wall. Madison didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She just did what she had always done. She got to work. The conference room hummed with restrained energy as the projector flickered to life. Evan stood at the front now, pointer in hand, the title slide of his presentation glowing behind him. Phase 3 Integration. Overview, Project Horizon. He cleared his throat once, then again. "Morning, everyone," he began, glancing down at his tablet. "Today I'll be walking us through the system interface revisions and our projected rollout timeline." Madison leaned back slightly in her chair, hands folded neatly on the table, posture relaxed but focused. She wasn't here to embarrass him. She was here to ensure the project didn't collapse under ego and assumption. As Evan clicked through the slides, he began regaining his rhythm. He was good, no question, but his knowledge was skin deep. A few minutes in, he said something that made Madison's eyebrows lift slightly. "And we estimate end-to-end encryption integration by Q2 using the current TLS structure, with fallback protocols modeled after standard DoD firewall." She raised her hand, calm, not accusatory. "Sorry, Evan. Which fallback protocol specifically are you referencing? FIPS 140-2 or the proposed 140-3F, Rameworks?" The room paused. Evan's lips parted. He looked down at his notes. "I believe we're using 140-2F or initial framework, but pending updates from I think procurement." "No," Madison said gently. "Procurement doesn't manage cryptographic compliance. That would come from systems security engineering." Evan nodded quickly. Right. Of course. A few people shifted in their seats. The head of engineering, Thomas Bailey, tilted his head with new interest. Madison caught the subtle recalibration in his gaze. She didn't press further. Instead, she smiled politely and gestured for Evan to continue. But something had already shifted. By the time he reached the final slides, half the room was watching Madison instead of him. Not out of awe or intimidation, but alignment. Gravity had changed direction, and they could feel who was holding the center now. Evan sat down a little faster than he intended. Shannon turned to Madison. Colonel, do you have any further questions before we move to resource allocations? Yes, Madison replied, smoothly flipping a page in her folder. A few notes on system audit trails and conditional access tiers. And, just like that, she took the helm. She spoke without raising her voice. Her questions were sharp, her points were layered with experience. She referenced operational simulations, zero-day vulnerability tracking, predictive defense modeling. Nothing flashy, just facts spoken fluently by someone who had lived in both the code and the chaos. Her father, seated across the table, had not spoken once, but his posture had changed. He no longer leaned back with the certainty of a senior executive in home territory. He sat straight now, hands clasped, watching. He had once said she'd never be anything in uniform. Now he watched a room full of executives take notes on her every word. At the close of the meeting, Shannon stood. Colonel Cole will remain on site this week to conduct performance assessments and provide strategic oversight as we move into Phase 4. Please coordinate directly with her team. A soft flurry of paper and movement began as people stood and gathered their things. Madison took her time collecting her materials, nodding to the team leads who passed by. Then a quiet voice broke the noise. Colonel Cole. Madison turned. A young woman stood near the doorway, maybe mid-20s, a junior analyst by the look of her badge. Auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, laptop hugged tightly to her chest. I just wanted to say, she paused, then exhaled. Thank you. For the way you handled everything today. For how you didn't flinch. I've never seen anyone like you in a room like this. Madison blinked. That's kind of you. What's your name, Rachel? Well, Rachel, thank you. You've got a sharp mind if you caught all that protocol talk. Stick with it. The woman smiled a little sheepishly. It just gave me hope. That someone like me could. She didn't finish. Madison did it for her. Be taken seriously. Rachel nodded. You don't need to be loud to be powerful, Madison said gently. You just need to know your work and know who you are. Rachel smiled. I'll remember that. Madison watched her leave. She didn't say it, but she felt it. This is why I came. Not for the boardroom. Not for my family. But for the ones watching quietly, waiting to believe it's possible. The afternoon light poured in sideways through the conference room blinds, casting long shadows across the carpet. Most of the staff had already cleared out. Only the hum of the HVAC system and the low murmur of hallway conversations remained. Madison, do you have a minute? Her father's voice was quiet, not cold, not commanding, just uncertain. She turned. Harold Cole stood just beyond the glass doors, Evan a step behind him. Her mother, Catherine, must have arrived during the meeting. She now hovered awkwardly beside a small table of stale coffee and untouched pastries. Madison gave a small nod. Sure. They didn't go far, just to a vacant side room with a round table, the kind meant for lunch breaks and HR check-ins. Someone had left a half-empty water bottle in the corner. It felt appropriately unglamorous. Harold gestured to a chair. Sit, I'll stand. Madison replied, her tone neutral but not sharp. No one spoke at first. It was the kind of silence that didn't just hang, it pressed. Catherine looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the right entry point. Evan folded his arms, then unfolded them. Her father cleared his throat once. Then again. Madison broke the silence. I sent you all the ceremony invitations, she said, voice level. Every promotion. Every assignment. Even the article in Defense Weekly when I received my commendation for the Pacific Cybersecurity Intercept. Harold's mouth opened. Madison, we didn't come, she continued. You didn't reply. You didn't even text back a congrats. Not once. The words weren't said in anger. Just truth. And truth was heavier than any accusation. Her mother looked down at her hands. Evan stepped in, his tone defensive. We didn't know it was this big. I mean, Colonel, I thought you were still stationed overseas somewhere handling logistics. That's because no one ever asked, Madison said quietly. You assumed. And when I tried to explain, you changed the subject. Or you praised someone else louder. Evan flinched slightly. I didn't mean to make you feel. You didn't have to mean it, she interrupted. It still happened. She turned to her father. You once told me the military was for people who ran out of options. That I was throwing away my potential. That no one serious would respect me for wearing a uniform instead of a suit. Harold looked away. The words echoed back after years cut differently now. I didn't know you were doing this level of work, he murmured. This kind of impact. You didn't want to know. That landed harder. Evan finally spoke again, quieter this time. I didn't know you'd gone this far, Mads. I swear. I didn't see it coming. She looked at him, and for the first time that day her expression softened only slightly. You don't have to understand everything she said, but don't pretend it's not real. Don't reduce it because it's not your version of success. The room sat with her words. Finally, Catherine lifted her gaze. It was never about you not being good enough. We worried. You were always so independent and we didn't know how to support that. I think we were afraid. Madison gave her a long look. You let your fear become judgment. Her mother nodded slowly, lips pressed tight. A long pause. I don't need an apology, Madison said at last. I'm not here for that. Harold stood as if the chair beneath him could no longer hold the weight of what had been left unsaid. Then what are you here for? She thought for a moment. Looked at each of them, not with accusation but with clarity. I'm here to stop shrinking myself to fit your silence. 6 months had passed since the morning Madison walked into that conference room in full uniform. The seasons had changed. So had a few other things. Her apartment in Washington, D.C. was modest but bright floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Potomac, and the minimalist space was quietly curated, clean lines and warm light. Everything in it had a place. Everything told a story. Tonight the story would be about home. At precisely 6:08 p.m., the intercom buzzed. She opened the door before they could knock. Her father, Harold, was carrying a slim rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. Catherine, her mother, clutched a ceramic dish covered with aluminum foil. Evan and Megan trailed behind with a bottle of wine and a slightly unsure smile. Nice place, Harold said as he stepped inside, eyes scanning the room. He paused at the bookshelf where Madison had arranged her awards, but not front and center, just quietly there. Without a word, he unwrapped the package and revealed a framed newspaper article. Colonel Madison Cole named lead strategist on $1.2 billion cybersecurity contract. The photograph showed her in full dress uniform beside General Callahan and the Secretary of Defense. I thought you might want a copy for your wall, he said softly. Had one printed and mounted. It's in my office too. Madison's eyebrows rose. Thank you. That means more than you know. He gave a short nod and stepped back. Catherine shifted from foot to foot, clearly unsure where to begin. I brought your favorite, she said, lifting the dish. Apple crumble. The one I used to make when you had a bad week in high school. Not sure it's as good now. Madison took it with both hands. It smells exactly right. They all made their way to the dining table. Madison had set it with quiet care, linen napkins, brushed steel cutlery, 3 candles in the center. No one rushed. No one filled the silence with nervous chatter. They just settled in. Over dinner, conversation came in waves. Sometimes stilted, sometimes surprisingly smooth. Her mother asked, so, what exactly does adaptive protocol layering mean? Madison blinked, then smiled. It's like building a house with smart doors. The more the system learns about the threat, the more specific the locks become. Her mom nodded slowly. Okay, that actually makes sense. From across the table, Evan wiped his mouth with a napkin. Cheer, bit hung, he said, slipping into their childhood habit of calling her Cheer when emotional. We started applying some of the tiered access control strategies you mentioned at the last phase review. Clients were blown away. Said it was the most future-proof design they'd seen. She looked at him for a long beat. And did you tell them where it came from? He gave her a sheepish look. Eventually, Madison laughed quietly. 5-minute delay. That's a new record. He raised his glass. To stealing from the best. They clinked glasses. Even her father joined. As dessert was served warm apple crumble with melting vanilla ice cream, the room grew easier. More natural. The edges softened. Harold gestured to one of her awards on the shelf. That won the Cyber Defense Commendation. That was from the Singapore Intercept, right? Madison nodded. Yeah. If we hadn't caught the breach, it could have compromised half the joint operations infrastructure in Asia. He gave a low whistle. You always said computers were your thing. I didn't realize just how much. Her mother leaned forward slightly. And the mentoring program you mentioned last time, do you like that part of the job? Madison blinked, surprised. Very much. It reminds me that it's not just about algorithms. It's about people. Catherine smiled. You always did care more than you showed. Madison almost replied, almost said, and you never asked. But she didn't. Not now. Instead, she said, I still do. The conversation drifted. Not everything was perfect. There were still small silences, still old habits that hadn't quite unlearned themselves, but no one pretended anymore. No one dodged. That was new. That was enough. As they were saying goodbye hours later, Catherine lingered at the door. I still don't understand everything, she said, voice low. But I'm trying. And I hope it's not too late. Madison met her gaze. It's not. She meant it. Healing hadn't come in a grand apology or a dramatic confrontation. It came in apple crumble. In framed articles hung without words. In someone asking the right question even if they didn't understand the answer. As she stood alone in the quiet after they left, Madison walked to the shelf and straightened the frame her father had brought. It didn't matter whether it was perfectly centered. It mattered that it was finally there. The city was quiet that Sunday morning. Madison sat by the window, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands, the kind she had learned to brew just right during years of early deployments. The sun spilled across her hardwood floors, catching on the metals still tucked humbly into the shelves, half hidden behind a row of books on strategy and leadership. She hadn't worn her uniform in weeks. Not because it didn't matter, but because she didn't need it to matter anymore. On the coffee table lay a single sheet of ivory stationery. A fountain pen rested beside it, uncapped, as if the words had flowed and the ink still remembered them. Her handwriting clean and deliberate read, Dear General Lauren, I wanted to thank you truly for what you did for me all those years ago. When I didn't yet believe in myself, you saw something I hadn't even named. You never made me feel like I had to become someone else to succeed. You taught me that leadership isn't about proving you belong. It's about acting like you already do. That lesson saved me more times than I can count. I hope to pass it on now to the ones who sit quietly at the table waiting to be seen. To the ones whose voices shake a little when they speak but who carry steel underneath. With respect always, Colonel Madison Cole. She folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it. No grand fanfare. Just the final stroke in a chapter long earned. Her thoughts drifted. To the girl she had once been, standing in her childhood bedroom with a military brochure in hand, scared but certain. To the woman she had become, standing in a boardroom in full uniform, calm under scrutiny, speaking, not to impress but to lead. Madison exhaled slowly, watching the city begin to move outside her window. She used to think the moment of triumph would come when her father finally said, I'm proud of you. Or when Evan stopped treating her career like a footnote. But the real victory, it came when she realized she no longer needed that validation to breathe. It came when the silence of dismissal no longer had power over her choices. It came when she looked in the mirror and saw someone she respected, no permission required. Her phone buzzed beside her. A message from a junior officer she'd been mentoring. Ma'am, your guidance last week helped me finally submit my proposal. Thank you for making me feel like I belong. Madison smiled. That was the legacy now. Not changing minds, but changing lives. She stood, poured the last of her coffee down the sink, and slipped the envelope into her coat pocket. The post office was only a few blocks away. And as she walked through the quiet streets of Washington, she felt it not the burden of being seen, but the lightness of being known. By herself, most of all. I didn't follow the path my family had drawn. I chose my own. And that, more than anything, is the path I'm proudest of.